to the Doctor Who Marathon. I'm your host McEdam, and today we're going to be talking about the final story in the second series of the Sarah Jane Adventures, Enemy of the Bane, written by Phil Ford and is directed by Graham Harper. Now, this is a very noticeable story within the franchise of not just Sarah Jane, but in Doctor Who canon overall. You see, not only does it feature the return of the Bane, who last appeared in the first story of the Sarah Jane Adventures, Invasion of the Bane, with Wormwood actually returning from her role in that story. So some really great continuity there, and means that the Bane, the one that's kicked it off, comes back into the finale story of the series. But as a Doctor Who fan, and if you know anything about this story, you know what I'm about to say. This story features the return and the only revived series appearance of Brigadier Alistair Lethbridge Stewart, played by none other than Nicholas Courtney, who returns to the role. Nicholas Courtney has not played this character in live action performance since Downtime, a 1990s straight-to-video release. He hasn't appeared as the character on screen officially since the 1988 or 1989 story Battlefield with the Seventh Doctor story. That was the last time that they've seen each other. But of course he's appeared on numerous occasions in Big Finish audio dramas, as I believe the last time we ever tackled his story, he was in an episode of Unit, the Big Finish spin-off, which was not really that successful. If you want to know my opinions on that, you can go back and watch them. I think I did 2. There's 4 overall, I know that. Oh, well, it's actually technically 5, and I did 3 of the 5. If I remember, go back onto those. This would be, sadly, his final appearance, as he would not get any other appearances on the televised TV, which means that he didn't actually return to the main series Doctor Who, despite him being asked numerous occasions to return. However, things like his health and scheduling conflicts prevented him from returning, which is a crying shame, before he sadly passed away in 2011, which is, I believe, three years after this. So that is a shame. Now, here's a fun fact about this story, which personally I could not believe. In fact, I still don't believe it. Apparently, the original idea was for Martha Jones, played by Freeman Agnew, to return to the series and this. However, due to her being in Law and Order UK, she couldn't return. They got Nicholas Courtney. The fact that one of the biggest icons in Doctor Who history was an afterthought, I don't believe it. I think somebody's made that up. But anyway, this means that Nicholas Courtney, as Brigadier, is the only character, with the exception, of course, of the Doctor, to appear in the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s with the Downtime, and if you don't count that, you got Big Finish audio dramas, and the 2000s. That is a legacy right there, I tell you. So, really great to see him return, and in a big event story like Enemy of the Bane. This story is, of course, you can imagine, a pretty popular story. It is very well loved by the fan base, and I'm not gonna lie to you, that's mainly because Nicholas Courtney has returned, and he's just such a charming, energetic, that military mindset of his is just pure gold. But does the story hold up on itself? Does it utilize its characters in a justifiable way? Nah. But let's get on to the story. The story actually kicks off pretty well, in my opinion, with the pre-credit sequence being Rani's mother. Basically, she's made a flower shop, she sells flowers, and she's had this massive big order by a mysterious client who she lets in the middle of the night, and she gets like a massive check, and it turns out that the client is actually Wormwood, who has returned from, of course, Invasion of the Bane. And she uses like this thing to knock Rani's mother unconscious and kidnap her, and that's how it starts. Great story, great way to open a story, especially how Wormwood is a recurring villain, and the fact that presumably she died in the last story, because the last time we seen her, she seemed to have exploded in the factory. There's no real, there's no real explanation other than just she survived. So if you're looking for like an explanation, maybe a flashback, you might be disappointed here. And so that's mainly the main focal point of the story, is Wormwood's return. And for the most part, the story actually handles this very well, with Luke having nightmares about Wormwood seemingly recently, and Sarah Jane tries to comfort Luke. It's like, it's only a nightmare, it cannot be true. She called you Luke. I didn't name you Luke until after Wormwood died, so it couldn't be. So you got nothing to worry about. And Luke's just like, yeah, but I've never dreamt before. This is technically the first nightmare I've ever had, and so that becomes a bit of a concern. Only for Rani to then knock on the door and basically explain that her mother's been kidnapped. She turned into the flower shop, and and when they got there, there's flowers everywhere on the floor. There seemingly some sort of burglary, and her mother was nowhere to be seen, with Rani and Rani's father being heavily concerned. Now, I was kind of really disappointed by the fact that Rani's parents are an afterthought in the story. I felt like through the start of the series they had some potential. At least Rani's father, being the headmaster, being a lot more logical character than Alan was, and so I was kind of hoping that he would get a more prominent role here, like Alan did at the last episode of series 1. It didn't happen. He mainly is sidelined along with Rani's mother, and so Sarah Jane goes in to investigate, with Rani suspecting most likely it has something to do with aliens, but Sarah Jane is like, I want to investigate just in case it's aliens, but most likely, it could be something else. Everything doesn't have to revolve around aliens. I don't think there's ever been a Sarah Jane story which doesn't revolve around aliens. So yes, it will revolve around aliens. What were you expecting? And so Sarah Jane goes to the flower shop, and she uses her scanner thing and quickly realizes that Wormwood is involved, and that she kidnapped Rani's mother, and that something is getting involved. And so Sarah Jane, along with Rani, go in to investigate, try and keep Luke out of it, because Luke has this, not an emotional attachment to Wormwood, but the fact that Wormwood is technically the closest thing he has to a biological mother. I mean, they make this that's mainly this main narrative here, is that Luke is kind of, like, he knows that the Bane, Wormwood, is a bad character, a villain, but he can't help but feel curious on why he was created, and he does want to have some sort of relationship with her, to some regard. Or at least that's what this story does really great, is Luke's characterization, because slowly we see his point of view, how his first thing is like, she's evil, I want nothing to do with her, but yet, like, his mind process, where he goes, right, I just want to talk to her, 2 minutes, I just want to ask her, like, these simple questions, and there you go. And then through circumstances, dibbly dobbly. So I really like Luke's character here. Tommy Knight does a fantastic job at playing his character here. As I stated in Temptation of Sarah Jane, his performance is slightly different to what it was in the previous few episodes, and let's be honest, all better for it. But anyway, Sarah Jane and Rani find Rani's mother, with the Wormwood basically explaining that she needs Sarah Jane's help. And the performances with Wormwood and Sarah Jane, and they have this confrontational, just this automatic confrontational due to their previous outing, just makes them some really entertaining television, I tell you. And so Wormwood actually makes this bargain that she needs Sarah Jane's help to stop the rest of the Bane from destroying the galaxy, because they're looking for a particular weapon, a particular device which will summon a sentient being which would allow them to conquer the galaxy. And Wormwood, she, because of her failings in the last story, Banes eat their failures. They actually eat them. And I originally thought this was going to be like a ploy, that Wormwood is trying to betray them, and like this is just a scheme to gain Sarah Jane's trust. And although that is kind of the case, the idea that the rest of the Bane are trying to kill Wormwood isn't. She is genuinely on the run, and she does genuinely need Sarah Jane's help. I do genuinely appreciate that for part one, for the most part. And then, and it does lead into some great dynamics where Wormwood has to work with Sarah Jane, and she has some really great fun little bits of dialogue. And so she takes her to Sarah Jane's attic, and basically Wormwood explains what she's after. There seems to be like an ancient mythological story in the galaxy about this character called Horus. And Horus, he physically just could not die. And so years ago, I think they said like 100 BC, they actually found a way to split his consciousness from his physical form, and whoever brings them back together will be able to conquer the universe. And it builds up this great mythological adventure with this theme of mythology in the narrative, which is awesome, don't get me wrong, but which we will see later on does kind of become a hindrance on the narrative, in my opinion. So Sarah Jane basically freezes her in this in like a cell in her attic, and they go downstairs, and Sarah Jane's like, Luke, stay here, I need to go and see someone, and I need to tell someone about Horus, because it's in a specific location. It's in Unit's Black Archive, which first gets its mention in this story. Fun fact, Unit's Black Archives is where they basically store the most dangerous and mysterious items ever to be found by humans on Earth. So basically it's like their giant warehouse, in a sense, where they keep all of their most dangerous devices. And that obviously becomes important in later stories, specifically in the 11th Doctor story, Day of the Doctor. So pretty good, cool props there. And so Sarah Jane needs the help from someone from Unit. Doesn't want to get Luke involved, which is a really big continuity issue, because Unit was implied to be the one that helped Sarah Jane adopt Luke. They should already know that Luke isn't exactly normal, and so like if they find out about Luke in this story, so Sarah Jane's trying to keep him out of it. Really strange, doesn't really match up with the canonicity of the previous Bane story, which is a bit odd, I will agree, but this does lead into Sarah Jane needing the help of one Brigadier Alistair Lethbridge Stewart. Nicholas Courtney absolutely owns this role. Of course, he's a lot older now than he was in Downtime and Battlefield, though he was still pretty old in those stories. But here he can't be as action-packed as possible due to health reasons, of course, and he cannot run specifically. But it's just really nice to see him here. It's just kind of a shame that he has very little to do in regards to the story. Don't get me wrong. When we first see him and we have that scene in which he's talking to that unit general, who gets a prominent role in this story, especially in part 2, it's really strange, really bizarre that he's in this story, but then that's kind of it. And it also brings into an issue of crowdedness in this story, because we have the Brigadier returning and this main focus with the main enemy, with the Bane and stuff, but we also then have this mythological story of Horus, and so all of these three elements are fighting for screen time, and I feel like Nicholas Courtney did kind of get the short end of the stick. Only have a few great scenes where he's just shouting at other characters and just being the Brigadier, but in terms of his plot, his part in the plot, Sarah Jane needs him to go into the Black Archives because Brigadier has a very high access. Also, yes, I know he's technically not the Brigadier in this story, having been retired. However, come on, it's the Brigadier. You can't say he's not the Brigadier. Brigadier Alistair Lethbridge Stewart. Or Colonel, depending on if you're watching his first story. Anyway, and yeah, he does get Sarah Jane into the Black Archives, which ties in with a cliffhanger in which the Bane start attacking people. The Bane have found Wormwood in Sarah Jane's house, and they basically a handful of soldiers are coming in and attacking Luke and Clive, with Luke having a small discussion with Wormwood, not trusting her, but is kind of regretting not having a relationship with her, and feeling kind of bad that Wormwood is being hunted down to a sense. And when the other Bane find her, she basically asks Luke to release her. There's no other choice. You have to free me to save not only you but also your friend. And so Luke gets released, and we then get a scene where they're going to chase around the house. Luke and Clive get separated from Wormwood, and we have a Bane coming up to her and is about to eat her, until suddenly it gets shot at the back by a familiar character, as we see the return of Krang from the last Sontaran. Yes, they actually got Anthony O'Donnell not only to play a Sontaran, but playing in 2 roles, making him the first recurring Sontaran in the franchise of Doctor Who overall. It is kind of a shame that, despite some really great scenes in part 2, I'm gonna rush a bit on part 2 because for obvious reasons. But the problem is with Krang being here. I keep changing the pronunciation of his name. I'm just gonna call him Krang. The problem with Krang in this story is that he goes from being a very great presence on his own in The Last Sontaran to being a henchman who has this alternative motive. And yes, it is kind of interesting. And if this story was just Sarah Jane going up against this team up of two recurring villains of the series, being Wormwood and Krang. Completely fine. Absolutely, that sounds like a lot of blast, and you have some really great interactions where Krang is just like, he has this idea of getting revenge on Sarah Jane and conquering the galaxy and becoming a ruler, trying to justify being defeated last time, with Wormwood basically telling him to shut up, and slowly through the story he gets really agitated with her, and their relationship is on rocky ground, and it's a lot of fun. It is a lot of fun, but in the plot, with the plot being crowded as it is with Brigadier and the Horus plot line, this story does kind of cripple under its own weight here, with part 2 having Brigadier really nothing interesting to say or do. He mainly just becomes another part of the team. He still gets some really great moments. There's a really great bit where the general character who we saw previously, meeting up with Brigadier's first scene in his story, he basically is trying to track down Sarah Jane because they broke into the Black Archives, or at least that's what we're led to believe. And the Brigadier has points his walking stick at him, which we learn is like a gun. Which the fact that the Brigadier walks around with a walking stick gun, just constantly, that is hilarious to no regard. I imagine, after the events of Unit, he is extremely paranoid. But yeah, it is kind of a shame that all of these elements are boggled and they're squished together in a plot which makes part 2 a very entertaining, because there's so much going on and there's a lot of great funny moments, but the story is just boggled down with so much stuff. But this does also lead into one of my favourite scenes, as Sarah Jane does get the this thing, part of the Horus's, I don't know, the scrolls of Horus, which turns out to be its program, because it turns out Horus is actually this sentient, closer more to a computer than an actual sentient life form, and that's why it couldn't technically die. And so they need to track it down, and Wormwood gets it off, takes it off Sarah Jane at one point when they're trying to, when they all team up, and then it turns out Krang is working for her, and Sontaran holding a massive gun. Also, I absolutely love Brigadier's reaction to seeing a Sontaran again since the Time Warrior. Let me stay there. This is the second Brigadier. He didn't actually. I don't think he actually met the Sontaran. No, he didn't, did he? Huh. But anyway, I just love how the Sontaran just walks on into the room, and Brigadier is just like, "You aliens just don't get the memo, don't you?" As if he also, on occasion, just has these fun adventures of aliens in his personal life as well. This story should have really been a crossover with a now unproduced Brigadier series. Who doesn't want to see that? But it's also, one of my favourite scenes is when Wormwood takes the Horus, she also takes Luke, not only to be a hostage so that Sarah Jane doesn't get involved, but also so that she kind of has this connection, because every of her family has now abandoned her, and Luke is the closest thing she has to a son, and so she tries to build another relationship with him, and basically tells him that you have this, and you can become the prince in a galaxy where I'm the emperor of the galaxy. And there's this great moment where she gives Luke the device and tells him how he's this amazing, and I'm honoured to have you as a son. I truly do care and appreciate you, and that and that you could join my side. And Luke just like looks at her in disbelief, and then just legs it, taking the device away from her. That is comedy gold. But in terms of the overall plot, the narrative is just fighting over so many ideas and concepts, with the Eye of Horus being this really grandiose, mythological plot line, which gets built up, especially when you get scenes where they're picking up the thing and the music is blasting. And we also have Mr. Smith at one point basically explaining that this is a intergalactic story that basically gets told throughout centuries worth, and this is like a massive historical event in the history of the universe, and now it's tying all the way together down to this moment in modern day Earth. And because it's juggling with all of these other plot lines, it doesn't feel as big as it deserves. It generally just feels like they're all going after this MacGuffin, and it doesn't have the right setup to get us really invested when we kick into part 2. With part 1, with the build-up, I think the build-up does very well, because that's mainly when, at the time when it was being set up, there was only mainly 2, that story and the Bane. But now we've got the Sontaran, we've got the Brigadier, and it just all collapses under its feet. And the whole other Banes being chased after just kind of disappears in part 2, really. And Brigadier then, after going on this chase in this car where Sarah Jane basically has found where Wormwood has taken the horse, and hopefully they can find Luke again, because Cran has found Luke, stopped him from escaping, and takes the device back. Do they then track it to this basically this Stonehenge thing, which is where the body, the sort of body of Horus is, which turns out to actually be a portal to where he actually is stored. Putting this device in makes this giant hole in the floor. But before they do that, there's this force field, and only people who are human can actually achieve it. And that Luke then can be Wormwood's way getting in. And it's here where the Sontaran is like, hold on, you're now bringing the boy into our deal, that's not part of our arrangement. And so he threatens to kill the boy, with Wormwood basically injuring the Sontaran. When Sarah Jane and the team arrive to basically stop the day, Brigadier is just stuck in the car. Well, he's not stuck in the car, but presumably he stays in the car. That's really disappointing that he is completely excluded to the final moments of the story. But it does mean that the full story mainly focuses on Luke's relationship with Sarah Jane and Wormwood. And though, because of how Wormwood is structured and how Luke feels, it's clearly one-sided, and that the story's narrative flow isn't that interesting, because despite Luke having this confrontation inside of him, it's still very clear to him that Sarah Jane is his mother in his eyes, and the story's interest mainly comes from Wormwood basically feeling like she's being betrayed to her, and is like, right, I am a monster and I'm going to destroy the world, only for Krang to push her into the black hole, where they presumably die or get transported into this alternate dimension to never be seen or heard from again, saving the day. Hooray! And we get this lovely sweet goodbye to Nicholas Courtney, and like with all endings to Sarah Jane's series, it ends with this monologue of Sarah Jane looking at the sky and thinking of how amazing life can be, and how It's all about the friends we make along the way. That was really cringy, I do apologise. So, that is Enemy of the Bane and the final story of Series 2. Overall, I will admit, with the exceptions of some really great scenes and the fact that it has some returning characters, which as a fan of the series did put a smile on my face, the story itself is kind of pants. It's not well structured. So the story goes really quick and fast paced in certain scenes, and then really slow and tedious in others, with so much stuff being boggled together, which doesn't allow for room for certain aspects to breathe. And it's a cardinal sin that not only does it bring back Nicholas Courtney in his only revived appearance, but makes him have nothing interesting to do. But I'm so glad he's in it, and we just needed more Nicholas Courtney. That's all I'm saying. We just need more Nicholas Courtney. And I really wish that we had a much better final story for him to go off with. But yeah, it's still fun, it's still entertaining. I mainly recommend this to fans of Brigadier, of Sarah Jane, especially if you're a fan of The Last Centauran and Invasion of the Bane. But on its own, it's just a pretty dull and uninteresting story. It really was a disappointment for me personally. But there you go, that's Enemy of the Bane. So join me next time when the Doctor tries to compose his own song, but has meddling issues with a grask. So join me next time for Music of the Sphere. And I'll see you next time of the Doctor Who Marathon. Ta-da!